but don't you have to lie to be a lawyer? And I remember thinking to myself, lie to be a lawyer? No. I mean, why did you even get that impression? And a lot of people, I think, maybe don't understand how the law works, or don't understand, as you said, what's this concept of rule of law? What's the concept of, there should just be black and there's white.
Exactly.
But there isn't really black and white, is there, right?
Exactly.
There's never black and white. I mean, if you live in the world and you've gotten to the point where you're my age, not that I'm that old, but I've seen that in so many things, there's never a black and white.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. We have a very special guest with us today, Miss Suraya Turk. Suraya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. So, Suraya, what I wanted to talk to you about today is obviously your background as a lawyer. Now, I know you're the managing partner of Legal Circle, and you have a background actually as a prosecutor, as we were just talking off camera. So we're going to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And what I wanted to do today is cover three main areas. So we're going to talk about law, communication, and entrepreneurship, because I think they're all interlinked. And I know that you've helped over 650 startups, advising them on legal and getting set up. So we're going to dive into all that. But before we get into all of this today, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you. So obviously my name is Suraya Turk. I've been a lawyer for almost about 20 years now. Out of those 20 years, I've been for almost 13 now in the region in UAE. So it's been really exciting. I think I have... In terms of my background, it's been, I think, non-conventional, traditional in the sense of probably a lawyer's career and pathway. And it's funny because I spoke recently to somebody who said, oh, wow, that's sort of an interesting, colorful background. And, as you said, I started my career early in the day, actually just when I finished university, and I entered into prosecution world. And obviously that's all about courtroom, advocacy, criminal law, and that was back in Australia. And I really loved doing that. And so I found myself doing that for about 7 years. And then life took a little bit of a turn. And my husband decided to pursue his career, which took him to Dubai. So at that point in time, he made a decision to go. I wasn't very excited about coming to the UAE, if I'm completely honest.
Okay.
It's completely different to how I feel now. But at that time, I was very passionate about what I was doing, and I was very keen to continue to grow and pursue criminal advocacy and the prosecution world. But life has its way of taking you where you need to go. And I moved over to the UAE. And then I found myself asking, well, what do I do now? Because I can't become a prosecutor in the UAE. My Arabic sort of wasn't to the standard that was required to actually practice here and become an advocate here. And obviously the system's very, very different. So then I got introduced to a QC who was doing a little bit of work on a cross-border transaction case, and I did some work with him because that was sort of bridging, and I was able to then use sort of the knowledge, the experience that I had in prosecution on the case with him, and he was based in the DIFC, so I did some work with him, and then he introduces me to a local law firm.
That's what happens.
And then that's it. That's how it works in Dubai, isn't it? And then from there, I then moved into a litigation law firm based out in the UAE, but I was heading the corporate commercial division for them, and they had a joint venture with a German, or an arm of a German international law firm that was setting up. So I did that for a number of years, and then I kind of just moved into the corporate commercial world and sort of grew and developed in that space. And then about 7 years ago, I could see that the UAE legal landscape was changing. There was a lot about innovation now. There's a lot about technology. Silicon Valley was really leading the way in the space of entrepreneurship and innovation. And I could see now that, businesses and corporates and everything was moving more towards startups and SMEs and scaling and tech, right? Because that's where the scalability, that's where the money is. That's really how the world's moving. And so I remember at that time thinking, well, how do I stand apart from other lawyers in the UAE, which is saturated with lawyers and we're such a small market? How do I differentiate myself? And so at the time, there was some changes. So I left the law firm that I was working with, and really it was my clients who encouraged me to set up. And that's when I set up Legal Circle. But I remember at the time consciously saying, right, if I'm going to move into a law firm and it be my own, then I really have to set myself apart. And now I'm going to move into and start working with startups. And that's kind of how I got into the private equity and venture capital space. And to be honest, it's been 7 years. I've worked with so many startups. I've helped them, but they've also helped me in terms of learning, growing, and really understanding that entire space. And as you said, in that role, I've really been able to do everything I love in terms of advocacy, in terms of entrepreneurship and law,
You get a taste
and
of like
bridging
everything.
all of that. Yeah, bridging all of that. So that's a little bit about
okay.
my experience.
Well, thank you so much for giving us that context. I always like hearing my guest story of when they started and how they got to this point. So I wanted to start the conversation here and touches on what we were talking about off camera just now. So I had a guest on my podcast and we had this discussion about rules and policies. And he's like, there's a difference. I'm like, rules? He's like, rules have consequences and policies are kind of like just guidelines. They're more flexible. There's no consequence to it. So using that frame, let's look at the law.
Right.
So because there's that famous saying, the rule of law, they say, is final. However, as you know, the law can be interpreted in many different ways and I can manipulate it to my advantage. So how can something like the law that's so supposed to be so final and set be interpreted and manipulated in so many different ways?
Yeah. Okay, so let's draw a distinction, right, between interpretation of law and manipulation of the law.
Okay.
Because they're two different things.
Okay.
So, even when we look at the word, or if you look at the word manipulation, it's really bending something to, kind of be an advantage for you. Whereas interpreting is taking what something says and saying, how do I apply it to my scenario? What does that look like? Now, there are always going to be interpretations of the law. And that's a known fact. And that's why, for example, when we look at common law or when we look at, when I was practicing in Australia, it's based on precedents. And the whole concept of precedent is the interpretation of a law and then looking at how somebody before you has applied that law to a same set of facts to derive a precedent, which then you can use to support in your argument and your interpretation of the law.
Okay.
So that's one thing. That's when we're looking at interpretation, that's quite specific and different from manipulation. Manipulation is bending something to your will. Manipulation is finding loopholes and trying to get through those and manipulating a law so now it's to your advantage. So I think there's really a difference. The law cannot be and should not be manipulated.
Okay.
But can the law be interpreted differently by different parties? Absolutely. This is the whole thing. And this is why we have, for example, when we look at, previously, and when we were talking offline about prosecution, I mean, this is why you have the right to a defense lawyer, for example, and the government has a right to a prosecution lawyer. And there's a jury who sits there and presides over the hearing, and they determine what they think should happen to somebody, for example, in that particular matter. It's all a matter of then interpretation. But what a lawyer's role is to how he uses an argument, supports it with evidence within the framework of the law.
Okay. I get the distinction that you're talking about. The way I look at it, I guess maybe manipulation is not the right word, but it's interpreting the law and understanding how I can use it to my benefit. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Maybe it's not manipulation. Maybe that's not the right word. Or maybe is there a misconception that we have here about the law? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, maybe it's a little bit, how do I put this? Because I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to offend people that don't like lawyers. And I remember, sorry, this is going a little bit off topic, but I even remember when I studied law, my grandparents were like, but don't you have to lie to be a lawyer? And I remember thinking to myself, lie to be a lawyer? No. I mean, why did you even get that impression? And a lot of people, I think, maybe don't understand how the law works or don't understand, as you said, what's this concept of rule of law? What's the concept of, there should just be black and there's white.
Exactly.
But there isn't really black and white,
Exactly.
is there, right?
Exactly.
There's never black and white. I mean, if you live in the world and you've gotten to the point where you're my age, not that I'm that old, but I've seen that in so many things, there's never a black and white. And it's hard because the rule is made by humans and it's made by man, really. And it evolves over time to adapt to changing circumstances. And sometimes it doesn't adapt it quickly enough. And maybe that's where you go, well, I can see how I can use perhaps that they haven't covered this circumstance to my favor. But then that's not really manipulation, is it?
Okay, then maybe that's not the right word then. Yeah.
So I just I'm only wary of using the word manipulation because when people use that, it's almost like then a lawyer is dishonest. A lawyer will find you a way to kind of use something to your advantage and then set you apart from what was intended by the law to make the law fair for everybody.
Fair.
So I'm, as a lawyer, I'm not about to say that you can do that. I mean, maybe people have some experience and maybe they want to, maybe they think a little bit differently about it. But in my opinion, for what it's worth, I'd like to think that the rule of law is still based on procedural fairness. The idea and the intent behind law is for there to be fairness and justice amongst people. And as you said, the difference is that if you break the law, then there is a consequence.
Exactly.
Rather than, for example, with a policy, it's more about guiding you on how to stay within the framework of the law.
Yeah. So you I love having this debate because so my mom's a lawyer too, and she's been a partner for 30 years. So anytime we have these law discussions, she's like, no, this is what the law says and you have to do this. And when there's contracts, I'm like, Mom, what do you think about this? And she's like, no, this has to be removed and you have to protect yourself. One thing about the law that I think a lot of people don't understand is we don't really have knowledge or access to it. Like the general public, and I know you, for example, jumping a little bit ahead here, you offer courses on this.
Right.
For like entrepreneurs and stuff. So I think the law is a powerful tool you can use to, is the law to attack or to defend?
Look, the law is not there to attack or defend. It's more about these are the frameworks that you need to work within in order to make something fair, transparent, and open. Now, to everybody that you work with, right?
Yeah.
That's how I see, especially the frameworks in corporate commercial law. Like, why is there corporate governance, for example?
Sure.
Corporate governance, the whole premise is how does this corporation work? And we know that it's set for profits and is intended to make profits for their shareholders and whatnot. But how do you do it in a transparent, fair, open way where, for example, you're complying with what the company's law in that particular jurisdiction is?
Sure.
And so this is what it is. It's there for guidance. It's there for framework and it's there for transparency. That's how I see things. And that's why when I advise people, it's all about that. To me, the law should be there to support your story as a startup or as a company or whatever you're doing to develop.
Yeah.
And it's there to say, look, I've set up a company in a way that's complying with all the laws and I'm growing this in a way that is going to be scalable, that's going to give my investors a great return, and they know transparently what they're investing into, for example.
Gotcha.
So it's always about, for me, transparency, honesty, openness, and all about everything coming together to tell the story of why this company has grown in the way it has, or scaled in the way it has, or pivoted in the way it has, or maybe restructured or amended, or so whatever it's done. And what the rationale and the logic is within that framework.
Gotcha. So I know you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I watched a podcast you were on and you said something interesting, and it kind of applies to, not just applying the law or setting up the right legal framework for now, but thinking long term. So for example, you said if you want to fundraise, have create a holding company. So that's how you can, raise the funds and stuff. But I think that's where the challenge of the law is like, if I came to you, I'm like, Suraya, I'm about to open a business. I struggle to think of the legal implications long term. So I've had business people on the podcast who set up businesses, and they're like, the cost of the license, the activity. If you set up in one jurisdiction, you might have to close completely and open another, and you lose all the bank details and so on. So me as an entrepreneur, what are the key things, at least the key laws or rules or understandings I need to pay attention to once I'm setting up my business?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because I think the problem with any industry that you're moving into, and particularly with entrepreneurs in the technology space where there are so many legal implications, is you don't know what you don't know.
True.
So when you're in this space of darkness, you don't know what's next, you don't know what's coming, you don't know how to think 10 steps ahead. So for me, just as a blanket general statement to begin with, education is so important.
Okay.
So go out there, speak to as many lawyers, speak to as many business owners, get yourself in networks where there are people that are either in the same position that you're in or ahead of you, so that you can learn from what the mistakes they've made, and hopefully also the success stories that they've been able to achieve. So that's the first thing. You've got to really immerse yourself in that world and upskill and educate yourself so you can start to think about what are the things that you need to be thinking of 10 steps ahead. But now if we go back to, you're a first-time entrepreneur, you're a business owner, let's say you've just touched and land down in Dubai from Europe, for example, and you say, right, I'm here and I'm setting up a business, I'm so excited. Well, the first thing you need to know is, what is the appropriate license that is going to allow you to operate in the UAE? Okay. So in the UAE, general rule is if you're going to be earning revenues and having a business operation, you need to have the relevant license.
Sure.
So the starting point is the license.
Yeah.
Now, once you have your license, the next point, and obviously there's so much around, setting up the license, as you said, the jurisdictions and where and how and structure and activities, etc. And obviously then there's visas if you're coming from abroad. There's the real estate, the space and where you're going to sit, and are you going to operate? Is it going to be an office? Is you going to have multiple employees? Are you just going to start solo? So there's so much that even goes just into that first step.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, it's like, okay, well, generally what happens is they start, if they've got a viable business model, usually they'll start to network, they'll start to generate some revenues, they'll start to obviously offer their product or their services, and then they earn, some income. And from that, they start to need staff, for example. So they'll need employees. They'll go to market to try and find staff. Now, that entire space is relevant to employment law. What are the employment laws in the UAE? How do I hire this person? Do I give them a visa? Do they have their own? If I'm in a particular jurisdiction, DIFC, for example, have their own employment laws. ADGM have their own employment laws. If it's on the mainland, they have their employment laws. So again, what are the employment laws that are going to be governing this relationship with my employee?
Yeah.
So you have that. And then, of course, you've got scalability of the company. Now I want to grow. Now I want to, expand my office. Now I might want to move into Saudi or across the GCC. How do I do that? And there's so many nuances around that. So it just keeps developing. But from that, usually with a technology company, they get to a point where their funds run out. And they're like, well, now I need partners. I need investors. I need money. And so then they go to market to fundraise. And that's a completely new world unto itself. And now the legal landscape starts to look very different, because now you're in the world of shareholders. Now you're in the corporate commercial world of, what are the rights of the investors and who am I going to have as an investor? What's the corporate governance of my company now? How am I going to set up the board structure to allow for growth of this company and to give rights to certain investors who want to be involved in the scalability of this company? So now there's so much that goes into that itself. And that probably is one of the hardest, I think, processes for technology startup companies, especially because there's so much that goes into it. There's so many technicalities in all of the legal documents. And this is where I say to entrepreneurs, you need to get educated. You need to understand. If there's something you don't know, now is the time. You really need to start knowing it. You need to start understanding what are the implications of having investors in your company, of dilution, for example, of what it looks like to set up the board and the corporate governance. What decision-making powers do they have? How do they make them? What if there's an exit? What does that look like for somebody? Actually reading and understanding all of the investment documentation. And what I see daily is that people, or startups, particularly founders, they don't actually know. And the problem is when you don't know, then you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what questions even to ask. And this is, how we came up with the entrepreneurial course after so many. There were
probably thousands of
count. I've even lost count, honestly, of the workshops and the trainings and the free education that we've been giving through Legal Circle. to help startups and entrepreneurs understand the landscape and just understand that if they're sitting with a lawyer, what questions they need to ask. What are the things that they need to be looking out for if they're speaking to an investor? What are the things that they know they should immediately say no to? What are the rights perhaps they might need to entertain if it's a strategic investor? So then what we did was I said, right, we've got all this information, all of this knowledge. Let's set up this course, which is based on 6 modules and essentially categorizes, what are the pain points that entrepreneurs go through from licensing through to exit that they need to know.
Yeah.
And then I got into a studio, literally recorded that information. So it's very nuanced. It's very relevant to the local market. And part of the course as well, we interview startups who have done very well for themselves, ones that have, done great fundraising or had an exit, lawyers, venture capitalists. So then we have discussions, with these people and really adds to the course itself.
Sure.
So now every time I have a startup who goes, I don't know, I've just come to the region, I have no idea, here
there
you go. Go get educated.
Yeah.
And then come back and at least you know now what to ask your lawyer.
Yeah.
At least you know now, the lingo, the terminology that we use that doesn't come naturally to people, because if you've not learnt it or you've not heard it through experience, you'd have no idea.
So look at all the things you just said. Like there's so many technicalities, nuances. It's so contextual as well.
Absolutely.
And in everything you said, the question I was thinking about, and you mentioned scalability, is how do you set up for flexibility? Like right now, for example, in my case, I'm a solo founder.
Right.
But in time, I might want to hire people, but that means I don't have the license for that. So that means you have to get a new license, to do that. So that's the challenge. It's how do you set up for flexibility because you have to predict long term, but at the same time, I don't want to pay a heavier cost now for something I don't have.
Absolutely.
So it's that weighing up that balance. But the second part of the question that I think is important, because I look at this kind of like therapy in a way. You have to pick the right lawyer. Mm-hmm. I think the relationship if I'm a startup, I'm going to work with someone, the relationship I have with the lawyer is the most important thing. So if I came to you, I'm like, Suraya, okay, I know what I need to do now, but who should I work with? What are the, let's say, red flags I should be paying attention to? Be like, all right, that's not a lawyer or a law firm that I should be working with.
Right. All right. So there's 2 parts to the question. The first question was, how do I scale with flexibility?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what I often tell all the entrepreneurs and startups that I work with is, you can't go from 0 to 100, right?
Yeah.
Take the steps that you need to and grow organically, so you're not overburdening yourself or the company before you need to. So the way to do it is to start with what's necessary first. And as you grow and you need a bigger glove, grow into that. For example, you're saying, I'm a solo entrepreneur now. Maybe later down the track, I need something bigger. But right now, I'm good. I'm testing the market. I'm seeing whether people like my product or service, and then I'll grow. Now, in that case, great. Get a license that allows you to do what you want to do now, knowing full well that you're going to have to obviously have another license or move into a different jurisdiction and have a bigger office maybe to accommodate more people down the track. But if you don't need that today and it's not necessary, then don't do it.
Gotcha.
For example, when I have
That's
clients
really
who say to me, we've got this AI ID and we want to trademark. And trademarking can cost quite a bit.
Yeah.
But when I look at their journey, they're only at the start. So I'm like, trademark is 100% necessary for you, but it's not necessary right now. So keep quiet about what you're developing, but develop it, build it, have all the contractual documents you need in place to protect your ID. And then in about 6 months' time, either before you've gone to launch, if they really do have a product that's worth trademarking and patenting and whatnot, before you've gone to market, because it can't be in the market before you've patented, at that time do it. But at least, it's not the first thing after you set the license that you need to go and get, right?
It's having the right priorities, I guess. Setting the right priorities for the stage that you're at.
So it's sitting with a lawyer and saying, this is where I'm at and this is where I want to go. How do I get there and what's necessary for me now? Because you may not always know that.
True.
But as I said, the first thing is, if you're definitely going to be generating incomes and revenue from the business activity, it's the license. Make sure you get the right one. And particularly with technology companies, some of them are highly regulated, like, for example, in the fintech space.
Of course.
So the licensing itself is an entire exercise and a
task.
And you want to get through that.
Something like that, yeah.
Exactly. So you want to get through that first and then take the next steps. But for me, my advice is always to grow organically.
Okay.
For example, you don't have to have a team of 100 if you can have a team of 10, subcontract out some work, and then as you get bigger and grow, you can bring those people on full time, for example, from an employee perspective. And the same thing with the office space and scaling and the product and the launches. For me, it's about, I think, growing organically and sustainably is going to keep you going for much longer.
Absolutely.
Because everybody I've seen that overburdens themselves with overheads from the outset really doesn't have enough runway. 4 or 5 years into it, they're high and dry. So for me, it's about how do you do it organically? You know, I recently saw somebody's books and I could see that they were burning so much money on marketing costs in the first few months of business after they had fundraised. And it was like, ooh, I mean, yes, to them, it was absolutely necessary. However, is that amount necessary? Could that have been reduced so that it gives you more runway to be able to do more with your products, scale in a more organic fashion? And obviously now they're not in the best place. So, you know, it's all about risk. It's all about assessing where you're at when you're at that time and really getting the help of people that know. So that takes me to the question of the lawyer who you work
the red
with
flags.
And when you
exactly,
get
yeah.
exactly. I think what it's important to know is that lawyers are a great help from legal structuring, from scaling, from protection of interest, from corporate governance setup, all of that. But does a lawyer know how to help you, for example, financially, when you're looking at your books and how to grow and scale? No. So I think what you need to realize is you need different people who have experience and have skills in different areas of the business.
Okay.
That's the first thing from a startup perspective. Now, with the lawyer, what they help with is helping you to see along the milestones in the journey of that business, what are the red flags that you need to be looking out for? What are the things that you need to be doing? Let's say, for example, we take a fintech company. A lot of fintechs will come to me and say, look, if we now try and get the fully fledged license at the DIFC or the ADGM, it's going to cost us an extremely large amount of money because to be compliant is quite costly. So how can we find a structure that allows us to do what we're doing, but maybe use third parties who have the license that we would otherwise need to help us in the outset?
Oh, interesting.
And then as we grow, then we will move into that full license and become fully compliant and do what we want to do. So sometimes they know that, sometimes they don't. But as a lawyer who's got experience, they can say, well, do you know what? Maybe explore this first. Then when you're ready, move into becoming a fully compliant, law firm, a platform that can, deal with money and handle investments and payment gateways and whatnot. So sometimes it's about that lawyer has the experience because they've worked with many companies similar to yourself.
Gotcha.
And so when you're choosing a lawyer, because your question was, so how do I choose a lawyer? Choose a lawyer that has that experience because you're learning now from the practical experience and the insights they have of dealing with somebody who's been doing similar to your business, but also they understand the legal landscape. Because what you want to do, particularly as a startup and an entrepreneur, you need a lawyer who understands both.
Exactly.
Because you don't just want legal advice, you want practical business legal advice.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you find a lawyer that doesn't have that commercial acumen or practical, business legal advice, they're going to say to you, you need to get fully compliant. You need to have these. There's no ways around that. We can't structure you in any other way. If you're in this business, this is what you need to do. But a practical business lawyer will say, well, actually, in the early stages of that business that you now see that's fully compliant, they did 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So you can do similar to that. And this is how you would protect yourself, for example. Or you can say, oh, yeah, in 1 year, this is where you need to be because
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3 will happen. And how do you know 1, 2, 3 will happen? Because you've seen multiple other companies,
Yeah.
So already today, when I speak to a lot of my clients, I'm like, yeah, I know where you're at.
Yeah.
I know where you're at, and this is where you're at. And the next thing that's going to happen to you is 1, 2, 3, because this has actually happened to 3 other clients similar to yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, immediately now it's relevant, it's relatable, and it's practical.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you need to do. When you're picking a lawyer, you have to have trust and confidence in what they can do, and somebody that's able to walk with you through that journey and help guide you.
Yeah.
Not everybody is ever going to have all of the answers. I don't believe that. I don't think anyone in any profession knows everything all of the time. But can that person or lawyer or whoever's supporting you know where to go to get the answer and understand it and apply it practically more quickly than you can to save your time and money? Yes.
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, then that's great. Go with them. Right? So
it's so listening to this, I'm just thinking about my parents. So my mom's a lawyer, my dad's an entrepreneur.
Okay.
So I've sat with them for years when they're like doing contracts, having discussions. My mom will always apply like just, you know, more of a pure law perspective, you know, this how you need this, you need that. And my dad brings the, as you said, the business side. Is like, yes, that's true, but there's a way to use it. You have to understand how this affects the business context. So
correct.
This is really good advice to people to understand, get people who have experience in the field that you need, not just obviously the legal experience, but more experience in those areas, in tech or in fintech, for
I'll give you an example. So recently we were working on a contract for a client, and one of the clauses had that we needed to get the fair market value of what the shares would be at the time on an exit event if it didn't go, for example, you know, through the normal route where there was qualified financing round and there was an exit. And it was interesting, like at that point we were talking about the clause and we were looking into it, and I thought to myself, actually, in this particular circumstance, it's not going to benefit us, even though it seems fair to say what the fair market value is of the shares at that time that there's an exit. But to get the fair market value for this particular company, who isn't a huge company, what they would have to do is appoint somebody that was independent, get them to do an analysis on the company and to say, okay, this is what the fair market value is. By the time, and I just fast forwarded, by the time that person or that company hired that person, did the analysis, they probably would arrive to a decision where there was going to be a deadlock in terms of whether they would sell the shares at that price. Rather than, for example, in that particular scenario, looking at it and saying, let's set what a reasonable price is for the price of that share now that we know that person would be willing to pay for at that point in time. So we don't have to go through the finicky headache of appointing somebody who was independent to do the analysis, to give us what the price is, and nobody was going to agree to it in the end anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
So sometimes it's like we want to do what we think should be done, or we want to put these fancy things in these clauses, but they're not practical.
That's the word, exactly.
And what's the point of having the law and drafting a contract or clauses that are so robust that put you into a situation where it's going to be practically ineffective for you?
Yeah.
And this is the difference between a lawyer who's like, this is what needs to be in the contract, this is what we need to draft, as opposed to an entrepreneurial lawyer that says, yes, that's what's typically drafted in a contract, but the size of your company, the circumstances, you know, the projection where I can see this is heading, in a few years, maybe this is more of a practical clause that you could still work with that would be a win-win situation and achieve a much more practical outcome.
Yeah.
And I think this is really the difference between...
It's that insight, you know, be able to look a little bit ahead of, we don't need this, you don't need this now, and this could actually be more beneficial to us down the line. And I'm so happy you brought up contracts.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping you can give me a new perspective on contracts, okay? Because contracts for me I heard once that contracts are there not to agree on like what we're going to do together. Contracts are there when things go wrong. It's not, you know, it's not to work together. It's so if things go bad, this is what's going to happen. Yeah. Now, when it comes to contracts, what I don't like about it is, for example, I just signed on a new client. And it's like positive, everything's good, we're working together. And then the contract comes. Obviously, I don't have that experience. So, mom, I'm like, hey, take a look. And it's the contract area where I feel, me personally, I'm like, now there's like it
almost like tension.
Yeah, because I have to think of
the negatives.
Exactly.
Yes,
so it takes away from like all this positivity that we have done to get to this point, and we want to work together. So
yeah,
let me tell you. Could you give me a new perspective or mindset on contracts?
Let me tell you the problem, right?
Yeah.
The problem is, as lawyers, we see this all the time.
Okay.
Everyone's super excited when they get started. I tell everybody it's a bit like a marriage.
Exactly.
When
Thank
you meet somebody and you're infatuated with that person and you absolutely love them and all you can think about marrying them, are you thinking about divorce? Are you thinking about, down the line when you're married with a couple of kids, you absolutely hate that person hates your guts. You want to exit the relationship and they're going to take everything from you, right? You don't think that. And if your mother or father or your in-laws or whoever would tell you about that, you would just be so infuriated with them. Like, what? I'm getting married? You're talking about divorce and prenuptials? I don't want all of that. But the problem is we know the reality of what divorce looks like. It's super ugly. And that's the same thing in a business relationship. When you get in, it's exciting. You both got ideas of what you want to do, of how you want to scale. But the nature of business and setting up a company and scaling and technology and anything entrepreneurial is it gets tough.
Yeah.
And it will challenge you and it will test you on every level.
And things can go wrong, or
And
very likely will.
To be honest, very likely things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
So whilst you don't want to be seeing that or worrying about it when you're super excited, yes, I know you don't want anyone dampening your light. I know that you don't want to be looking at the risk, but mitigating the risk is super, super important.
Yeah.
And understanding what the exit is going to look like early on is super important, because what happens is when things go rough and they go pear-shaped and now everybody's looking at how to get out and trying to get the most of what they can get out of what they've put in, and that's not a win-win, what happens is it gets ugly. And if you go to the lawyers, how are the lawyers going to know what to do in that particular situation? Often we turn to the contract. What did you agree prior to entering into the relationship about what this exit is going to look like? Now, the clearer that is in the contract, the much easier it is.
Sure.
If in the contract it says, for example, you're a bad leaver, and a bad leaver means you did something fraudulent, or you competed with the company, or you circumvented us, or you did something detrimental to us, that you would walk away with nothing. Then simple. Now, we don't even need to be talking about you walking away with nothing, because you agreed to the contract terms, which were, if you were seen or found with evidence to be a bad leaver, okay, then you would walk away with nothing to your name. Because why should you continue to have shares in a company that you've, done wrong by?
Fair.
Okay.
Fair, yeah.
So easy. Look at the contract. Now, let's say there was none of that in there. You're basically going to say, well, prove it. You can't take my shares. You can't do anything with them. I'm not giving you a power of attorney. I'm not a bad leaver. No, there's no end of discussion. I'm a shareholder and I'm not prepared to do anything, and you can't get me out so easily. Then what do we do? Now we start to find ways to go to the courts, but at the end of the day, we know the reality. Courts are expensive, they're time consuming, they're costly, and it's difficult. So as much as you don't want to be thinking of how to mitigate risk, it's super important.
You have to, right?
Because it's going to save you time, headache, and hassle later on. And this is the thing that, it's not all roses. It's not all colorful. The reality of anything in the world is that there is always positives and there are always negatives.
True.
And it's just about looking at those with a balanced view. You don't need to be so negative that it, suddenly dampens your positivity and you're feeling negative about entering into the relationship. No. But it's about, let's get real. Things are going great now and we hope that they continue. But if it doesn't, well, then how do we make things easier?
Gotcha.
And it's a bit like an employment contract. I mean, at the end of the day, which employer ever employs anyone, or which employee ever goes into that relationship without a contract?
Yeah, of course.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to be made sure you paid your salary on time. You want your salary. You want to be able to know that, the clauses, termination, if you were going to resign, what you would do, if there was going to be terminated, what you're going to do, and all of the framework of that relationship.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in corporate commercial. It's the same thing in anything that you're doing, right?
Interesting. So on the point of contracts, and I wanted to talk about liability.
Right.
Because you hear all the time, for example, in the example you gave, okay, if there's a clear contract, this is what we'll refer to. When things go wrong, we know exactly what's going to happen. But then, like you said, there's also other scenarios where there's none of that, and you have to kind of create a framework to figure out how this is going to end, or we're going to challenge this and so on. There's also verbal contracts. Like, that's the thing. So what if I said, Suraya, okay, yes, we agree on something, and then I go do something else? it's kind of, it's he said, she said, right? So how do you prove that? And then there's things like been reading in the news, there's cases that even your WhatsApp texts are like, can be proved as edited, you know, evidence. Yes. So you have to be like super careful. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you have to to me to not maybe say the wrong thing or commit to something that I might actually be liable for down the line?
There is the whole concept of an oral contract. There is that, right? You can. So you offer something to me, I accept it, I come around and I say, look, you know, you sold this, I wanted to buy it, here's $100. You've got to give me what you've promised to give me. And but that's a little bit different. In most cases, when we're talking about something that's you're going to be liable for, that is going to have consequences, you don't want to be relying on anything oral. Even though, yes, contractually, orally, you made a deal with me, I promised you something, those if they end up in court, are hard, because it's then he said, I said. You've got to use what the circumstances around that deal to be able to then, you know, prove who said what and how much for, and it becomes a dispute that gets messy.
Yeah.
What I suggest to people is, if it's a big enough consequence, if the risk is great enough for you, don't rely on verbal. Don't rely on what you told me, I told you, yes, so-and-so heard it. Rely on what did we put on paper. It can be an email. It can be in a WhatsApp. It can be any form of evidence that proves and supports what we've both said.
Yeah.
And this is the danger, I think, people make, where I trusted so-and-so, or I've known him for years, or I've done business with him, or, you know, I never thought he would do this. And then I look at people, I'm like, yeah, but this is the reality. Mm-hmm. The reality is, unfortunately, sometimes people are not what they seem, or sometimes circumstances change, and it's beyond our control. We can never know what somebody's going to do or not do. Why leave things to chance?
Yeah.
If it's very clear, an oral contract should be translated into a written contract, even if it's a very basic one. Now, obviously, as I said, assess the risk. The greater the risk of this relationship souring, then you need a better contract. If we're talking about a simple transaction, it can be simple as in an email, you're offering this, I've accepted, I've paid this amount to you, I accept the, you know, whatever it is. Now, as we're getting more complex, for example, if it's investment into shares or companies,
totally
and all
different
of that,
story there.
Totally different ball game. Now you can't rely on oral, you can't rely on chance. It really does make all the difference to have a robust contractual agreement that sets out what the terms are of this deal.
Yeah,
you know.
And I wanted to round off like on this point, round off the conversation today on the communication aspect, because I know you're an international speaker and you speak at lots of events and you love to advocating, to help people and so on. So I started working with a communication coach the last 2 months.
Oh, nice.
And she's taught me a lot about communication. Is not about what I say or like how my body is. It's a way you think, how you structure your thoughts to deliver your message in a clear way. And she always tells me, Khaled, communication equals currency. And as we're moving into this more automated world, your ability to communicate as an entrepreneur, as an employee, as anything is going to be more important than ever. So on the communication aspect, what advice do you typically have or give entrepreneurs on how they should present or pitch? Because that could be the whole difference between you getting that investor or you losing it.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with what your coach has said. And I 100% agree that communication, particularly in the world and how it's evolving with technology and AI, is probably one of the soft skills that is the most important skill that everyone in every industry should be developing.
Yeah.
Communication is so key to getting your message across, but also then not just getting your message across. I mean, when we think about in the entrepreneurial space, what's the point of getting your message across? The point of it is that you have somebody, for example, investing in you or believing in you or somebody trusting you. And so for me, I think the key in communication is what you've said, structuring your thoughts so they're logical. But even more important than that is being able to simply articulate something.
Exactly.
Because we're in a world now of so many complexities. I mean, the AI, technology, how it works. And if you're not able to simply communicate it so the person on the other side of you understands exactly what it is that you're communicating, and they can follow you logically, coherently, understand it, and therefore quickly trust you, then you lose them. And so this is sometimes what I see entrepreneurs do. It's what they're doing is so high level,
so clear
so
to
complex,
them,
and they're clear to them,
yeah,
but not clear to anybody
yeah,
else.
Exactly.
I mean, if it can't be clear to anyone else, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So it's about, for me, what I feel, and even as lawyers, sometimes we're speaking to our clients, and it's easy for us. We deal with the contracts, we see clauses, drag-alongs and tag-alongs and mechanics and MFNs, and there's all these fancy lingo and terminology that we use. But when we're sitting with a startup who's just exploring that world, they've got no idea.
Yeah, I don't know any of those terms.
Yeah, exactly, right? So how do we take that concept that is easy for us, difficult for somebody else, and break that down in a way that they can understand and is digestible to them?
Yeah.
And I remember even when I was doing law school, that was probably one of the most important takeaways in communication that I took. One of the professors was always saying, don't write in a complicated, complex way that nobody can understand. You as a lawyer are being trained in law, but you need to be effectively communicating that complex term in a very simple way.
It's like a jury, for
example. And
example.
that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Or like a jury.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In prosecution.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the evidence law, and there's the facts, and there's all these terminologies that, yes, detectives that are, the detectives that are investigating the case know, the lawyers on the other side that have, obviously been trained in law know, but the jury don't know that. And when you're presenting an argument to them, it's about presenting it clearly, structured in a very logical, coherent way, where it tells the story and it sounds so seamless. Now you have everybody's attention. Now they are more likely to be influenced by your argument because they understand and they can relate to it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the key in communication.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And it's an area that me personally, I've been trying to improve a lot, because I noticed I go around a lot before I get to like my question. It's just
we all do that.
I know, but it's like a thing I'm training, I'm trying to
Yeah.
improve on. For my last question today, Suraya, this is a question we ask all our guests. So our message with this podcast is to showcase that success comes in many forms and learning never stops. We've spoken to amazing people like yourself on the podcast. Everyone has a different story, a journey, and everyone figured it out in their own way, with their own story, in their own field. But I believe along the way, I know everyone learns a lot. There's usually one learning, which I like to call the game changer learning, that like just breaks your whole perspective of the world and you see everything in a brand new light. If I was going to ask you what that was for you, what would you say?
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I've been reflecting about that. I think for me, in that process, it's any time along that journey where whatever you're doing starts to become repetitive, starts to become normal, starts to become second nature. Stop. Challenge yourself. Don't plateau. Break it. Learn something you don't know.
Get uncomfortable.
Challenge yourself. Get yourself in a position where you're so uncomfortable and now you have to learn something new.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I think that's where you go from one level to the next, whether it's in your career, whether it's in whatever you're developing. I mean, when you even look at these entrepreneurs that are developing something, if they're just always, it's the same product, it doesn't develop, it doesn't grow, it doesn't offer a value add, you see that the customers start to decline. People go to the next thing that's new, the next thing that's better, the next thing that's improved. So even as products, you've got to keep developing, you've got to keep innovating, you've got to keep breaking.
For sure.
And it's the same thing with your personal success and learning and growing. Anytime you feel that there is no longer a challenge, something new, something making you so uncomfortable, then you're not growing.
Yeah.
And success is about continually growing. And how we grow is when we learn something new and putting ourselves in that really uncomfortable space. And then, of course, the journey starts again. I think it's continually renewing yourself. Yeah.
I always feel like, I love that message. And I always feel like once you, even if it's a small step out of your comfort zone, once you do it, the confidence, at least on personally, like I feel, I'm like, wow, like I I did that thing. And then that's like the
Absolutely.
snowball that begins, you know, rolls down to everything else.
Absolutely.
Suraya, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the show
Thank you
today.
for
This
having
was
me.
an incredible conversation. You really gave me a completely new perspective on law. I was looking
Thank
at maybe it was
you.
very black and white, attack, defend, but you were looking at a more transparent, clear way, you know, and it's just about protecting yourself and being smart on how you want to apply it.
Yes.
So I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
you. Likewise, it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Guys, to everyone listening, thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Take care.